Hamas wanted this war. So Hamas got the war, but what Hamas did not expect is that Israel would react to the point of taking out Hamas leadership at home and abroad and destroy Hamas infrastructure to the point that it did, nor that Bibi Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, would react by taking out Ismail Haniyeh in the presidential compound in Iran. Those were, and Iran would be involved in the war directly. Those were unexpected responses.
Why is the war in Gaza happening?
I was in Israel on October 7th. I was on the receiving end of the animosity that you're referring to. So I speak with this kind of in very personal terms. It's happening because of a fundamental problem, and it's not about injustice. It's about the inability of Israel's immediate neighbors, ordinary people, what Americans here called Gen Pop, the general population in those countries, not being able to recognize that the Jewish people have a legitimate right, justified by scripture, archaeology, and history, to be in those lands, to be in and around Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Haifa, Hebron, whatever you wish to call it. There's a legitimate claim backed by the Quran, the Old Testament, the New Testament, archaeology, and the Prophet Muhammad's own companion Umar inviting Jewish people back in the year 636. Salahuddin Ayyubi in 1187, Saladin brings Jewish people back. It was the Christians that forced them out. And there's Ibn Khaldun, the great Muslim historian, recognizes this. But today's activist Muslims and those in and around the state of Israel don't recognize the Jewish claim to be in Israel. And that's why Gaza happened. Because once the mood music is Israel has no right to exist, then it becomes, right, how do we remove it? So that's why I think we should go back to first principles and recognize Israel, Yaqub has every right to exist. Who are we to say Yaqub or Jacob has no right to exist and Jacob's children have no right to a country? It's just a bizarre, banal claim, but that's where we are. Once we've settled that question, that's why the Abrahamic Accords are so important, because it recognizes the Abrahamic claim, the children of Jacob, Yaqub, Israel is the same name, their claim to the land. Once you recognize that from the perspective of God, scripture, political reality, then you can say Hamas has no legitimacy. But we are, I'm afraid, now in a position of just trying to destroy Hamas without destroying its argument. So October 7th happened because large 2 million people in Gaza were forced, in Hamas concentration camp to believe in the fact that their neighbor Israel has no right to exist. Palestinian identity became not about prospering as Palestinians, but about destroying the state of Israel.
How close are we to those groups who, by the way, let's be honest, the people who run these places, they have a very strong incentive to maintain this battle. Because if I'm in charge of Gaza, the idea that we should just live peacefully, it might be beneficial to my people, but it's probably not beneficial to me, because I'm not going to be a billionaire in the way that I currently am.
Just right? Exactly, absolutely right, yeah. But it goes beyond that, Constantine.
Sure.
Some of the neighboring countries, it is in the interest of some of the political leaders, who shall remain nameless, who want to maintain a Gaza that is a genuine geopolitical problem. So when they come to the White House, they have relevance to Western political leaders. That here, Gaza's in my neighborhood, and this is what I've done. And I am both the arsonist and the firefighter. Whereas what you're seeing, there's one particular country in the Gulf that's part of this particular problem. But what you're seeing, and that's why the Abrahamic Accords again.
Qatar,
again, you said it not
right again. Okay, good.
Yes, 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
Whereas the UAE's point is, we will help the people of Gaza. Mm-hmm. We will help remove Hamas, and we will supply them with hospitals, medical needs, create a port. Let's create a Dubai in Gaza. And that's a different vision. The Saudis are broadly there, and the Israelis will need that help, as will we in the West. We will need that help. But that's a different vision. But all of that falls from being able to recognize the fact that Israel is a reality. And I mean, isn't it extraordinary that we're here talking about Israel, whether it has a right to exist or not, when no one says Pakistan doesn't have a right to exist, created in the same year on similar reasons, Lebanon.
Well, I've got a mate, he's Bangladeshi origin, Muslim, and we talk about the Middle East, and he gets really passionate about it. And I go to him, my mum's family, a large portion of them come from Lebanon. My mother was in tears last week talking about what was happening to Beirut. And I am not as partisan as you are around this. I try and talk to different people and get what is actually happening before. And in no way am I foaming at the mouth, which you are now. So why is this happening?
But when you say Middle East, I assume he's not angry about Yemen, Francis.
Yeah.
I assume he's not angry about Syria, Francis.
Yes.
I assume he's not angry about Sudan and Egypt.
And more pertinently, he's not angry about Iran and the shenanigans that are going on there.
Right. So we're talking here basically about his inability to fathom the fact that the Israelis, the Jews, have an upper hand over a segment of the population in Gaza and in Hezbollah and Iran. It's a problem of Jew hatred, and we've got to call it out for what it is. It's the inability to accept that Jewish people who were considered to be under Muslim land, Muslim control for millennia, or 1.5 millennium, now have their own country and their own state. And having been bullied throughout history, are now able to fight back. And there is that bug there, and we've got to confront that bug. So it's about this particular issue, because I didn't see that outcry when millions of Muslims and Syrian Arabs next to your mum's country in Syria were being insulted and abused. But I didn't see the weekly protests pertaining to Yemen or pertaining to Sudan or pertaining to Egypt. I just didn't. So there is this issue. We've got to confront it, and that's why I think that, I've been spending lots of time in the last kind of year and a half reading the Quran, and I find that as you grow older, you either grow in faith or otherwise you kind of. And I find in my in the recitations of the Quran real comfort and consolation that the Quran refers to Jewish people as believers. Yes, there were a portion of those believers who are seen to have changed scripture, turned against God, but Musa, Noah, or Nuh, the list is long. And I think, to your friend and others, returning to our source, i.e. our maker, God, our creator, and reflecting on those scriptures helps remove that anger that you see in people who are either on the Islamist hard right or on the far left of the political spectrum, more widely in the West. Because you realize that the Prophet Muhammad, when he comes to Medina, as the bearer of the Quran, he includes Jewish people in his ummah. And no one can deny that. Iran can't deny that. The Hamas, Hezbollah people can't deny that. That his community or his ummah included Jewish people, several Jewish tribes written in the constitution or the wathiqa of Medina. One of the rabbis, Mukhayriq, and I got this from a friend, and this is really interesting, a friend who's Saudi, who works in the Muslim World League in Mecca, where there are 62 Muslim countries that are its voluntary members. From Mecca, they're now talking about someone called Mukhayriq, who was a rabbi in Medina, who took out 200 members of his congregation to fight side by side with the Prophet in the Battle of Uhud on the Sabbath. That's our tradition. That's who we are. We're supposed to be in alliance with our Jewish friends who are the children of the prophets. We are the children of Ishmael. They are the children of Ishaq. It's not complicated. You've had Jordan Peterson on your show, and Jordan always talks about archetypes, Jungian archetypes. That's who we are. So, your friend and others need to get over the fact that they're now going to fight the Jews and destroy Israel. Those days are gone. Israel's here to stay. One of my friends in the Middle East talks about Israel as love handles. Whether you like it or not, you can't get rid of it. It's there. He talked about humor earlier, but that's just a humorous approach, recognizing the fact that it's reality.
Yes. Just
as Jordan is there to stay, so is Israel's there to stay. So, your friend's problem, as I say, isn't with the Yemenis or others, but with Jewish people in the region.
Because it's also as well.
I hope you tell him that.
Yeah. He wasn't prepared to listen to me. But it's also as well when I see that side of the argument. Look, like I said, seeing my mother in tears over what's happening in Beirut is awful. Obviously it is. Obviously it's heartbreaking. But I get quite annoyed when they go, well, it's Israel did this and Israel did that, and it's like, you seem disinterested in what Hezbollah have done to Lebanon and ordinary Lebanese people, and the atrocities that they have committed, and the misery that the Lebanese people live under, because let's call them what they are, these nutjob psychopaths run the country in the way that they see fit, And if you criticize them, you're not going to last very long.
As the Lebanese Prime Minister Rafiq al-Hariri found out, in 2004-5, he was assassinated. So you're absolutely right. But just to back you up further, another problem we have among young activists, especially Islamists, is a complete loss of cause and effect. Israel has been living with Hezbollah armed to the teeth on its northern border now for almost 20 years. And Israel held back because there was Western and other pressure on Israel not to commence a war. To date, in this last year, Israel has been on the receiving end of almost 15,000 Hezbollah projectiles, otherwise known as rockets, coming into sovereign space. You don't have the right to remain a sovereign state if in your territory you foster a terrorist organization. And that's why Britain went into Northern Ireland. And that's why America went into Pakistan and Afghanistan against Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden and Abbottabad. And Israel, under international law, has every right to be in those countries to remove a terrorist threat. I mean, it's not difficult to understand that Israel has a right to do that. But I think our friends in Lebanon and in Palestine and elsewhere ought to accept the fact that as long as there's a terrorist threat in those lands, Israel is forced to respond. So yes, it did not start on October 7th, as they say. It's true. It started long before that because of the planning, plotting, stockpiling of arms, being backed by Iran and being prepared for this day. And Israel is nothing other than a response to that. Now, it's a valid debate to say it's an excessive response. I understand that many of my Saudi friends say the response is excessive. In their words, you get to go crazy for 2 weeks. You don't get to go crazy for a year. But I point out the cognitive dissonance that if Israel had listened to those arguments, we would not have Yahya Sinwar dead. If Israel did not go into Rafah, as it did, we would not have Hamas dismantled to the point it is. You can't, on the one hand, call for a ceasefire and then say, isn't it great that Hezbollah's leadership is no longer alive, that Ismail Haniyeh of Hamas was eliminated inside Iran. Right, so there's a cognitive dissonance in that response. But at the same time, I understand that the response can be understood to be too harsh, because every life lost is a tragedy.
And it's also a cognitive dissonance to say, we should have a ceasefire with people who want you wiped off the face of the earth.
Well, there was a ceasefire on October 6th.
Exactly.
And the Israelis didn't break that ceasefire. Hamas intentionally broke that ceasefire. Hamas wanted this war. So Hamas got the war. But what Hamas did not expect is that Israel would react to the point of taking out Hamas leadership at home and abroad and destroy Hamas infrastructure to the point that it did, nor that Bibi Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, would react by taking out Ismail Haniyeh in the presidential compound in Iran. Those were, and Iran would be involved in the war directly. Those were unexpected responses.
So you think they're going to attack Iran?
Yes. Yes, it's a question of when, this side of a US election or after the US election, and much depends on who comes into the White House. The Israelis will not accept several hundred bombs landing on them from Iran, and they don't respond because the international community says don't respond. It sets the wrong precedent. And you can't fight, as per your question, Iranian tentacles while leaving the head of the octopus unharmed. And I think, you mean the Iranian president was taken out in Azerbaijan. So it's a question of when the Israelis will respond. I mean, if you're sat in Jerusalem, you want to minimize the threat surrounding you right now. You've done that broadly in Gaza with the end of Yahya Sinwar and Ismail Haniyeh. You've now got the north of the Israeli borders with Hezbollah. You don't want to attack Iran while you've got Hezbollah stronger on your north. You want to minimize what faces you and then go after the source of the threat. But Israel has pressure on it from its own Arab allies as well as us here in the West. But I think time will tell as to when it decides to strike.